All right, welcome everyone. My name is Nolan Johnson, and I'm really excited to hold this webinar with my fellow panelists, who I'll introduce in just a second. But we're really excited to talk with you all about careers in the State Department. And I also, before I go any further, I want to thank our partners at the National Society of High School Scholars for their support in putting on this webinar and getting such a great group of talented high schoolers to connect with us today. So my name is Nolan Johnson. I'm the Global Alumni Coordinator at the State Department, and I do a lot of outreach and coordination with alumni of U.S. government exchange programs which you all are able to apply for. So if you are interested in working at the State Department or a career in diplomacy, these programs, such as Nestle Y, which allows you to study abroad and learn a critical needs language such as Arabic or Russian or Persian. Other programs such as CBYX, which allows you to go study abroad in Germany. Yes Abroad, which allows you to study in the Middle East or in Indonesia or in South Asia. And Flex Abroad, which allows you to study in the countries of the former Soviet Union. These are great opportunities for you to, start your kind of career very early, even when you're in high school. And my colleague is dropping a link in the chat right now to where you can find out more about these programs, which are open for your applications right now through November and December. So please take a look at those after we're done with our webinar. And one other thing that I want to offer as an opportunity for you before we get into the webinar itself and talking about State Department as a career is please consider hosting an exchange student in your home. The State Department every year is always looking for great families to welcome a high school exchange participant into their home, from all around the world. It's an incredible way to connect with somebody and really provide a welcoming, loving family for that person to connect with while they're here on their experience. So please, think about that, talk about it with your parents. I think it would be a great experience for you. And then I just want to say a couple things about the State Department itself. First of all, I feel so blessed to be in this career, to be working for this federal agency. It's an incredible opportunity. To imagine that I get paid to do the things that I do on a daily basis, I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world. So what the State Department does is it protects and promotes U.S. national interests abroad and promotes prosperity, democracy, human rights, and shapes the international arena in such a way that, American values and international, and human rights can thrive around the world. And being a part of that is something really special. And basically, it is the diplomacy that our government carries out with other governments around the world and with other peoples around the world, because, we have to connect and make our case with people around the world. And just a little piece of trivia, the State Department was the first ever founded federal agency. So it was founded in 1789, when America was a brand new nation. I needed to find friends in a new world to strengthen its position and to be able to, engage in commerce and make connections and, be able to forge a brighter future for our country. And so, here we are hundreds of years later, and we're still engaged and we're still succeeding in that mission. And we're here tonight to talk with you a little bit more about that mission. And with me today are two incredible panelists to talk about that. First, I'd like to introduce Kelsey Ward, who is the branch chief for the Humphrey Fellowships and Community College program in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Previously, Kelsey has also served in the Secretary of State's Executive Office, coordinating high-level trips around the world, and she has also completed a temporary assignment as Acting Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires. Kelsey began her career in public service as a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru. Thanks so much for joining us, Kelsey. And also, we have Dan Patarini, who, like me, is a career foreign service officer. with the U.S. Department of State. In his nearly 16 years of service, his overseas assignments include tours in Oman, Egypt, Iraq, and Luxembourg. Currently, Dan serves as the Public Diplomacy Desk Officer for the Nordics, Baltics, and Arctic region, where he supports public diplomacy efforts across 8 countries in the Arctic region. Prior to joining the department, he worked as a high school history teacher and at an international educational nonprofit. And I can tell you all that none of your history teachers are as cool as Dan. So with that, let's get started. I think we're just going to rotate around now and hear from our panelists about how they got into the State Department and kind of what impelled them into that career. So let's start with you, Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Nolan. And it's so good to be here with all of you. When I think back to my own high school career, I so wish I would have known the different opportunities available at the State Department early on. I think exposure to international audiences, new experiences overseas is so critical for all of us to learn about one another, to learn about ourselves. So really pleased that you're already thinking about international engagement. For me, I think right after college, I didn't have the opportunity to travel much growing up, but I studied abroad in college, and that really sparked an ongoing interest in the world and learning more about it and seeing the ways that people can be brought together through these sorts of shared experiences. So I decided to apply for Peace Corps, and this was sort of back in the time where you said, hey, I'll go anywhere, send me, I'm up for it. So I ended up serving as a youth development volunteer in rural Peru. And that really just solidified my love for international relations. And I saw firsthand, I think, the value of what I now call people-to-people diplomacy, but really seeing people work together alongside one another and how valuable that can be. So when I got back home, I had to remember how to navigate an American grocery store, remember how to speak English, and find a job, right? And so I was fortunate, pieced together a couple of things in the interim, but ended up finding an opportunity in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs pretty shortly after I got back, and that was over 11 years ago. And so in that time, I've moved around. I really tried to be entrepreneurial in the way that I've navigated my career, to think about new ways to build skills, to build networks, to improve the kinds of programs and opportunities that we have at the State Department. But it's been a really exciting career trajectory. I feel like I'm always learning something different, and most importantly, learning from other people, both here in the United States and around the world.
Thank you for that, Kelsey. I too, for me, my journey started with my study abroad experience in Chile, and that really kind of sent me off on my adventure. So, Dan, I'd love to hear from you. What brought you into the State Department?
Thanks, and ditto for what Kelsey said to this group. I think we have almost 70 on. We're really happy that you're here, and excited that at your age and where you are in your life, that you're thinking about what comes next in your future, because you'll find through this conversation, this is really important to all of us, and it's important to our country. So my journey started when I was a little kid. And it's a little bit of a strange one in some ways, but not in others. My dad worked for an airline called TWA, which doesn't exist anymore. But he had the opportunity to travel to Saudi Arabia to help the Saudis get their airline, their national airline, off the ground. So we moved as a family to Saudi Arabia a long time ago. I would say in the 70s. So I'm going to date myself here. I was young. I didn't even start kindergarten there. We were only there for about a year and a half. But it had an impact on me, just knowing that I had lived outside of the United States. I don't think as a little kid I even understood what that meant, but it stuck with me. And I just was always, growing up, I was always interested in international things. When I would see the news and I would read about what was going on in the world, I knew I'd lived someplace else, and I remembered that, and we had photos, and we'd look through those kinds of things. So I was very naturally interested in the rest of the world. World history was one of my favorite subjects in school, and geography. I loved that, and those kinds of things. That led me to, when I was in college, I did a political science or government major, just because the issues are really fascinating to me. And I would say I also had a very similar experience in that I studied abroad in college. I studied in Syria, of all places. This was way before they unfortunately had a civil war. I was there at a time when things looked like Syria was going to have a peace treaty with Israel, and this was a long time ago, and people were very hopeful, very optimistic. But that experience led me to say, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep studying and learning more. So I went to graduate school, and it was in graduate school in Washington, D.C. at American University that I had two professors who taught a class called International Environmental Policy. And it sounds like really fancy, but it came down to this. They were negotiators. They negotiated treaties on behalf of the United States with other countries on the topic of the environment. And I thought that was so cool. And they were both they were adjunct professors, and they were both employees at the State Department. They were civil service experts like Kelsey. And it was that moment that I said, I think, all these things are lining up, and I'm going to try to do this. And for me, it was very much about serving. So I'm a foreign service officer, and Kelsey's in the civil service. And who I serve is you all. I serve the American people and communities around America. And so that opportunity to join the Foreign Service and to be out around the world, as Nolan was talking about, advancing U.S. foreign policy and helping to keep Americans safe overseas, and helping to solve international problems with allies and like-minded nations. That was really what I was looking for, and I've been lucky to have been able to do that for coming on 16 years. It'll be 16 years in January. So that's kind of, it's, for me, it seems like a natural progression. But at the same time, it started with being curious about the world and being interested in learning about the other people, other cultures, and those kinds of things.
And so thank you for that, Dan. I really appreciate it. And I think for a lot of people as well, talking about the inspiration of a certain person, or in your case, your professors, I think that also leads a lot of people in. For me, I want to say, to be completely honest, what really brought me in is I am a huge language nerd. Hablo español, falo português, يتكلم بالعربي, говорю на русском свободно. I love learning languages. I love the cultural connections that come out of that. And this is literally a career where, if you do enjoy learning languages and you enjoy those cultural connections that you make while you're living overseas and speaking these languages, the United States Foreign Service is the only diplomatic service in the world, as far as I'm aware, where you can be paid your salary to learn a foreign language. So for 9 months, I received my salary. I was paid to learn Russian. And for me, that's for something that I would love to do for free. And so having this opportunity to learn it so that I could go to Kyrgyzstan and connect with audiences there on social media and in person and give speeches at university. I mean, it's such an incredible opportunity. I mean, I had friends from European embassies who arrived in Kyrgyzstan speaking not a word of Russian, and they were expected to do their job and learn the language at the same time. And so, as a huge language lover, I'm sure there's some participants on the chat right now who are like, wow, I could do that. And I think that you all will be, incredible, and, follow my footsteps. I speak 5. So, I hope that y'all get to 6 or 7. So anyway, so that's been kind of my motivating factor. So before we go any farther, I do want to, I see that there's some questions in the chat, and we'll get to them in a second. But I do want to kind of, just kind of throw some questions for our panelists as well, just in general about careers, before we get to kind of the specifics of jobs and the specifics of scholarships. So, I wanted to ask, Kelsey and Dan, and so I think I started with you last time, Kelsey. So Dan, if you want to start us off, kind of what is your most memorable or important achievement that you've done in the Foreign Service? What's the thing that 10 years from now, you'll still be looking back on and be very, very proud of?
Well, that's a tough question. But it's a good question. Um, I have helped to start some programs in other countries. When I was in Luxembourg, I helped to create like a college night so that U.S. universities could come over there and they could talk to students that were in Luxembourg who were interested in studying the United States. And no one had ever done that before, and people thought, oh, it's a small country. It is a very small country in Western Europe, and no one will show up. And we put together this like a college fair, like you would have at any high school around the U.S. And there were about 25 U.S. universities that showed up because they go around the world to recruit international students, and like 400 people showed up. So I was like a if you're a fan of film, the just recently passed James Earl Jones was in a movie called The Field of Dreams, and the tagline was "If you build it, they will come." And that was, I started that event from scratch. I was really pretty proud of that. It's great to see students with their faces lighting up and thinking about the possibility of their futures. And we know in the United States we're enriched when we have people come from around the world to share their cultures with us and to learn about ours. So I'm particularly proud of that. I would also say there have been some times when I've been working to help Americans who needed support. One in particular was a woman who was in a difficult relationship. Her husband was not American, but she was, and she had two kids, and her husband was abusive, and she came to the embassy looking for help, and we were able to help her. We were able to protect her as an American citizen, give her advice as far as how she could get support from the local law enforcement. And so that protection aspect of Americans and working to keep Americans safe overseas, it's very humbling because you feel for the people that are in these situations, but you have a job to do, which is to try to support them to the best that you can as the U.S. government, as a representative of the U.S. government. And so I look at those kinds of things much more, maybe much more emotionally in some ways, but also very proud that my government, it puts first and foremost the safety and security of Americans overseas as a top priority. So those two things.
Thanks for that, Dan. I really want to echo your point about the fact when you're helping Americans overseas. I mean, these are people oftentimes at their most vulnerable situation, and to be able to, be a friendly face, be someone who speaks their language, and give them a helping hand to get them out of a tough situation. There's really nothing that compares to that. Kelsey, what about you? What is kind of your most memorable experience?
Thanks so much, Nolan. As Dan said, this is a tough question, and I think we're both really fortunate to work in a place where we have lots of really memorable experiences and proud moments. But I think I'll focus on something that I've been working on recently, which is really helping to provide students from overseas with an opportunity to build technical skills. And so we have been working with the U.S. community college system through our Community College Initiative program to provide a year of academic training and professional internships for students who really come from largely underserved and underrepresented audiences. And they come here to a U.S. community college, gain skills that allow them to join the workforce and really focus on employability. And so I have learned so much myself about sort of 21st century emerging opportunities around semiconductor technology, clean energy, agriculture, and agribusiness. And I think this is really exciting because it also has a really positive impact on the Americans with whom our international students are working. So, they're not just going to New York City or LA, they're going to Kirkwood, Iowa, or Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, or, Arizona, different places where I think you can really experience the United States. And so through this program, I've really been able to see the development of the students over the course of the year. And I had a particularly memorable experience just last year. I had the opportunity to go to India, and I was doing a couple of different programs, but we convened a group of alumni of our community college programs, and they took me on an all-day tour of their neighborhoods where they came from. And, incredibly limited resources, no running water, very little access to education. But the students who have gone through our program and gained entrepreneurial skills, early childhood education skills, had started a school in their own community that now serves over 100 students. So they took me and showed me how they were not only just serving these students, but also employing other colleagues within this area and helping to build more equitable economic development, provide opportunities. And so much of this came from the experience and the networks that they gained in the United States. And so, I think we've all heard some of these good stories, but being physically in New Delhi and having this opportunity to talk to the students, to see all of them looking and really see what the students who had spent time in the United States have gone on to do and how they have given back to their community was really powerful. So for me to play any role in this program is something that I'm really, grateful to participate in.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. I'm, the all-day tour that you described. I mean, it just sounds really incredible, and and it's something that when when I go back home and I tell people from Wisconsin like what I do on a regular basis, they're kind of like, "Wow, that's amazing," and and the thing is that it's winning friends for America all over the world, and America needs our friends more than ever. And, in the State Department, you can have a leading role in doing that. I want to just speak real briefly. It's not about a program, but, in addition to, negotiating treaties or, managing these programs, oftentimes the State Department is also doing things to kind of engage with media, engage with cultural influencers and others. And so my last assignment, I was in Kyrgyzstan, and Kyrgyzstan used to be part of the Soviet Union. It still has very close ties with the Russian Federation. It, on TV, on cable TV in Kyrgyzstan, you can see Russian news stations parroting anti-American propaganda, and so it was a difficult place to be an American diplomat, to be completely honest. But despite all that, the Kyrgyz people generally liked Americans and liked America, and so we were able to connect with the most popular pop singer in the country. And for New Year's, we did a joint video singing karaoke in Kyrgyz language, and it was like a crazy hit. And so what I'm telling you also is that this career will lead you to do things that you could have never even imagined possible. And, I'll always remember, belting out lines from this Kyrgyz song about, history and, just, playing the air guitar on the Instagram, on IG, with this video. I mean, it's something that I'll never forget, and it was my brief encounter with fame, my brief Swifty moment. So, what I want to say is that basically, you just really never know what incredible things you're going to do in this job, and that the adventure of it and the variety really is what keeps me coming back. So I also want to start answering a few of the questions. I've seen a few in the chat. There was one question about internships and how to apply for an internship. I definitely want to, and I dropped in the chat, the link to the page. But I think with internships, the important thing about getting the most, if you do pursue an internship in the State Department, when you come, people are happy to to kind of tell you about the career and teach you about it. And just go into it with an open mind, and definitely please consider it, because they have created a paid internship program which provides free housing for everyone. So no matter whether you come from kind of modest means, the internship program is for you if you're interested. So I wanted to answer that one. And then another question that I can offer to you, Dan or Kelsey, they're asking what opportunities are there for someone who has recently graduated with a master's degree?
Well, you'll probably hear this numerous times tonight, and we'll probably drop it in the chat. But the State Department's careers website, careers.state.gov, is more than just a careers website. It will lead you to more information about what you can do in terms of student opportunities, scholarship opportunities, internship opportunities. If you are in college, it will lead you to finding out more about internships as a college student. If you are a graduate and you're looking for a career, it will show you the pathways available to people that have recently graduated, either as undergraduates or graduates, have a graduate degree. We need smart people. We need people with lots of different points of view and who have studied a wide variety of topics. Because just to let you know, when we're out there in the world, we're dealing with global problems, and global problems require a lot people with perspectives from many different disciplines. So if you have an engineering major or a background in medicine, a background in science or economics, or you name it, languages, we need all of those people. So I often say that the State Department only has people. That's the value that we bring to the work that we do is in people. We don't have aircraft carriers. We don't have air forces or whatever. Those are important to defend the nation, but we have the value that people bring to it. So careers.state.gov, very well curated. You may find that there's so much information, but if you look carefully, you will find some really great insights into the work that we do. And I would say I'd echo what you said. Or the other thing I would add there is in high school, taking advantage of State Department opportunities for high schoolers, like Nolan talked about at the start of this, the Flex program, the Congress Bundestag program, Yes Abroad, all these kinds of things. That often sets you on a path so that you're aware of, because you're an alumni at that point, and you become more aware of and more attuned to next opportunities. So it's a lot there, but I think that's a great resource that we have.
Great, thank you for that wonderful response, Dan. The other thing that I want to say about careers is that, just to emphasize, there's something for everyone. There's in the State Department, there's the Bureau of Oceans Environmental Sciences, if you studied environmental sciences. There's Arms Control Bureau, if you've studied, kind of international relations. There's, there's we even have a law bureau for lawyers. So literally anything that you're interested in. In terms of applying to the State Department, there's different tracks that you can take, how to apply for a job. So there's civil service jobs that are on the USA Jobs website. Those jobs are there, and there are so many to pick up from. They're literally posting them all the time. So please look for those. For the foreign service track that you're going to, there's a specialized exam depending on what you're going to do. And then you choose one of 5 cones when you apply. The 5 cones are political, economic, management, public diplomacy, and consular. And so you choose one of those 5 cones, and each of those 5 cones has a different kind of focus for what you're doing. And you can read a little bit more after we're finished about what each of those cones does. So in terms of citizenship, are people still able to join? To be completely honest, I'm not sure, but they have all of the requirements. One thing I would say though is that many people join the State Department when they're 30 years old or 35 years old or 40 years old. So even if you aren't a citizen today, that does not mean that you cannot join the department at some point later on. We're lucky that is one of the huge advantages that the State Department has, in that it has people representing so many different backgrounds and that are so much better able to connect with populations overseas and audiences overseas. Because oftentimes, one of my really good friends, she's Bangladeshi American. She just went and did a tour in Bangladesh, and people were crazy about her. And so, we definitely want people who are Americans by choice in the State Department. And so even if the requirements are such that you may not be able to join today, please join once you get your citizenship, get your security clearance, and come join us and tell America's story around the world. So, you see, so the next question I'd love to ask you, uh, that I'd love to ask you, Kelsey, is, and Dan, how does the State Department play a role in national security? And how do we promote U.S. national security around the world?
I think that's a really excellent question. And the State Department does this in a variety of ways. But at the end of the day, the Department of State is really here to serve you all, to serve Americans, to help represent our equities abroad. And so I think in terms of national security, I'll sort of come at this from my public diplomacy lens, which is the work that, actually all three of us do, at least in some capacity. And this really stems from the belief that when you get people together from different backgrounds, you are able to better understand one another. And so we really see value in bringing together not just governments, but also individuals. So that might be high school students, it might be professionals working in particular fields, it might be members of nonprofit organizations or civil society. And I think by helping to explain and experience US values and US interests in a really nuanced and complex way, there's a much better chance that foreign leaders, foreign individuals will understand the United States and perhaps adopt trade policy or make decisions around education or collaboration in a much more favorable way. And so I think, I often imagine, if there's a foreign leader who was educated in the United States, who spent time at a US university, or maybe participated in one of our programs and has spent time in America, has friends in America, understands the way that we do our sort of work and business, they're not going to agree necessarily with everything that we do, but they'll have a much better understanding. And you know who they're going to call when they want to talk through a complicated issue or solve a global challenge? Their colleagues in the United States. And I think by doing this, by supporting programs like this, we are really building stability. We're helping to represent our own equities as Americans. And I think that really contributes to our national security.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. That's a great answer. I mean, you cannot overstate how important those connections are that our public diplomacy programs makes. Because that's such an important question, Dan, I didn't know if you have anything that you wanted to add on about how the State Department supports U.S. national security.
I think that from the work that we do, that is probably one of the best answers I think I've ever heard. Kelsey is being modest. She oversees a program that brings people from around the world together who are focused on really critical issues, the Humphrey Fellowship. And when those people come together, yes, they learn from Americans, but I want to drive home the point that they become colleagues and they become a network unto themselves. And so then what you see is when they leave their time here in the United States, they look to each other in different countries and form networks. And they have that shared experience here, but they also become supportive of one another in fields like medicine, in law, in environmental science, journalism. And that power, the power of bringing people together and helping people to form professional friendships or professional relationships, friendships, to push them forward in their career development. People remember that, and when we do that, everybody says, "Well, we do it's kindness of our own heart." Well, it is in our self-interest because a peaceful, prosperous world is good for everybody, and if we can play a small role in that, that helps our national security. That helps us become and stay a secure nation, and it contributes to that around the world as well. So Kelsey's, like, her team and the work that they do on that program, I think alone will account for so much goodwill towards the people of the United States. And we don't hear about that enough because a lot of times, you look at the news is always going to focus on the bad things that happen. The news is not necessarily going to show you all the successes, all of the good things, the positives in the world, but they are there. and in many ways, thanks to these kinds of programs. So.
Yeah. And I would just add, of course, more broadly, outside of the realm of public diplomacy, the State Department is all about diplomacy. So finding solutions, coming to negotiation results that are favorable to the United States, that's all a key skill of diplomacy. So we have officers overseas who represent our economic interests, who represent our political interests, who are thinking about ways that we can reach a deal, a negotiation, a collaboration, join alliances that advance American interests. And there's many different ways to come at this. And I think that's part of sort of the academic and sort of intellectual excitement around the State Department to think about these different issues. And I really believe more and more the biggest challenges of our time are things that are not just in the United States. These issues like combating the climate crisis or thinking about irregular migration or public health issues, we all know these won't be solved by any single country in isolation. So I think it's really heartening to know that there are dedicated professionals at the State Department who are experts in these very particular areas, who are thinking about how they can protect national security in these particular sectors every day. And I think somebody had asked, just to sort of answer this question at the same time, what kind of individuals does the United States want to send abroad? And I think the answer to this is, anybody who reflects the United States, right? We really are deeply committed to diversity in the hiring that we do. We want different opinions, different backgrounds, different expertise to represent the United States. So I think those who have a desire to, foster greater understanding on a global scale, who have really specific expertise in a particular area. And that doesn't mean just sort of more general diplomats like the three of us, but perhaps somebody who has really specific cybersecurity skills, or somebody who is a medical doctor. I think somebody asked that question. There are all kinds of different careers at the Department of State where you can build out your skills and find a really fulfilling career.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important point. And I do want to say something about the nature of an embassy, because I didn't understand this before I joined the State Department. So the embassy is the home for every single federal agency. So when you're talking about national security, yes, we do want to put diplomacy first and find a peaceful solution to conflict in the world. But when that's not an option, our embassy is the place from which our colleagues at Department of Defense, at the FBI, are connecting with their colleagues overseas, so that America has those strong connections to call upon in a crisis with foreign law enforcement, with foreign military officials. And the embassy is the platform that houses those connections overseas. So the State Department may not be the ones leading that connectivity between the United States and foreign military officials or foreign law enforcement officials, but the State Department is providing the embassy platform to allow those bonds to be built, which we can then call on to defend our national security from any threat which may arise. So just wanted to throw that out there, because it was something that I didn't realize before I joined the State Department about the nature of an embassy and kind of all the people that are housed there. So I wanted to, that was a great question. What kind of individuals does the State Department look for to send abroad? I would also say that, getting international experience is a good thing as well. I got my experience through Peace Corps. That helped me so much. I know Kelsey served in Peace Corps as well, but it doesn't have to be Peace Corps. There are so many opportunities. The Fulbright program. So say Peace Corps is 2 years and you may end up in the middle of nowhere. That's not for everybody, and that's okay. But Fulbright has a program called the English Teaching Assistants, Fulbright ETAs, and that is a 1-year assignment, and usually you're in a city. And so you can have an incredible experience teaching at a university. So, whatever it is, try to gain some of that international experience because and also it'll help you realize if the career is really for you, because it can be hard living overseas. And, and maybe you don't want to live overseas, but you want to be in Washington, helping the foreign policy establishment come up with the policies that we're pursuing overseas. So try it out first before you jump all the way into the deep end. That would be my piece of advice on that. Let's see. So we've gotten through a lot of these questions. Oh, this is a good question. I'll throw this out there. What would you recommend for a college degree for your chances of being hired by the State Department? Do you want to take that one, Dan?
I think it's a little bit of a trick question. You study something that you're passionate about. Kelsey touched on this. There is almost no discipline. I would argue there's no discipline that exists now that exists in a vacuum where there isn't an international element to it. And so therefore, literally any degree that you have, if you combine that with a passion and an interest in foreign policy or working for the State Department or solving particular problems that are global problems, that degree will be useful to you and useful to us. So I would say there is no sort of secret, there is no magic like formula to create somebody that is competitive. What's going to make you competitive is you building yourself as a person, being open to new experiences, looking for new experiences, pursuing your passions. And if those align with the work that we do, where we're trying to solve problems, we're trying to help our country and other countries, then that's great. That's what we're looking for. So I know that might not be a perfect answer, but it's really the most honest answer. We see people. I know people with so many different backgrounds and different degrees in the State Department, in the Foreign Service, and the Civil Service, and everybody. That diversity of background really is a massive strength because people bring a different perspective, and those multiple perspectives are how you can solve problems and how you can work effectively to do the work that we're called to do.
Great. Kelsey, do you have anything to add on to that one?
No, I mean, I would agree. And I think at the end of the day, the beauty of the State Department is that there are so many different options. So if you're really interested in a technical career, you can also find opportunities within the Department of State. And often when you look at USA jobs, those are some of the most highly sought after individuals, those who maybe have experience in architecture and want to build embassies overseas and design them. As I said, sort of medical professionals are in demand, cybersecurity and information technology specialists. So those might not be quite as apparent as the sort of people with backgrounds in political science or international relations, but there's quite a wide variety. And I think, as Dan said, the most important part is sort of your willingness to engage. I think there's really important skills that you develop to be successful at the State Department. But we are actively, as an organization, seeking to diversify the kinds of individuals that we hire. And that means people from all different backgrounds, all different expertises.
Thank you for that. I agree completely. I have an MBA, right? So that's not something you think about when, you think about people working in the government in diplomacy. So it all just depends. So we have a great question here, which I think we should all answer. What would you say is key in succeeding in diplomacy?
Noah, you should go first.
Okay. All right. Since I was ready, I don't want to spring that one. To me, the most important thing in diplomacy is the same as the most important thing in marriage, which is to listen. To truly, truly listen to what the other people are saying, because at the end of the day in diplomacy, you're seeking to find ways for you to win and for them to win at the same time. Because I do strongly believe that with creativity, with hard work, you can find those ways to do that. And so, so for example, just finding a way, like, what is, for instance, I was in Kyrgyzstan, and the political economic section was debating a kind of a negotiating over an agreement, and there was one kind of wording that the Kyrgyz side just wouldn't accept. And it wasn't until they really listened to them, like what the objections were, that they were able to kind of break through the knot and come through, because you just really have to listen to the other side. So practicing those listening skills, I think, is so key to diplomacy, because you really have to understand the desires and the motivations of the people that are on the other side of the table with you. So that would be my answer. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'm happy to build on that because I think truly listening is perhaps the single most important thing within diplomacy. You have to understand your audience, you have to hear what they have to say and to understand the common ground. But I also would say I think resilience is incredibly important. In diplomacy, you'll hear Dan and Nolan and I talk about successes and wins and things we're proud of. But I think we could also spend a lot of time talking about things that we tried and where we failed pretty epically, or, there were real challenges, or we just kept trying to get to yes, or to a solution, and we were told, no, 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 or not this way. And I think particularly in a very large bureaucracy that is the Department of State, you need to really have the desire to keep going back, keep fighting, keep getting to a solution where you're really having the impact that you want to. So resilience is important for a lot of these pieces.
Yes, never give up.
So Nolan had the A answer. I think Kelsey was like, if it was the game show at the oh my gosh, the Family Feud, where it's like the top 10, top 5 answers. No one had the number one. Kelsey, I think, had number 2, resilience. I would offer this. I think humility is really important, and I think that's important because you need to understand that there is something that connects us all. And when you look for those common things that connect human beings, that allows you to really listen. It makes space for resilience, and it helps you to see people not as different, but as you look at the similarities. People, you get to another country and sometimes you're just thrown into this, you think you've arrived on another planet, and part of that is just a frame of reference and a perspective. When you're humble and you ask for help, when you look and say, these are families, people have those same kinds of needs. I like to joke, everybody has a mother-in-law once you get married. Everybody has, when you sit down with anybody from any walk of life, anywhere in the world, and you want to connect to them, just start talking about, do they have an annoying sibling? We all, if you're lucky to have a sibling, or if you're only child and you feel like you're lucky not to have siblings, but the whole idea of those human connections and sort of being humble in that, looking for the really simple things that join us together. That's a really amazing diplomatic skill. I talk about kids, I talk about soccer, I joke about in-laws, even though I love my in-laws dearly. And the funniest thing is that those are just kind of universal things. Like I was also in India way back a long time ago, and I am in a family where everybody has the same letter. So I have an older sister named Dawn, and then Daniel, and then a brother David. And I think my parents they thought they were really clever, but there are so many families like that. I was in India and I was introduced to a Fulbrighter, her family there, and the kids came in and everybody had a name that started with A, and then the other branch of the family, all their names started with K. And I had this epiphany, like, it's just not my crazy parents in America who couldn't get our names straight because they gave us all the same first letters of our names. So I'm talking about that, and I remember that story with fondness because it was a very human, very humble, very plain, normal interaction. And at the end of the day, when you can do that, there's a lot of diplomacy that's right in that realm as well. So yeah, sorry for the long story.
I love it. Yeah, and I think that's right. It's just the incredible importance of just human connection. And so we do have another question in here that's an interesting one. So this is a good question. So Kelsey, maybe you can answer for the civil service, and Dan, you can answer for foreign service. So it's, can I choose where I want to go, or does the Department of State, like the military, where you go where you're told?
Sure. So this is a pretty easy answer in the civil service context, because if you want to be in a particular job, you apply to that very specific job. So it's very transparent, sort of the job requirements, the job responsibilities, as well as the location. So each time, for example, in my career, I have moved jobs and I've moved into many different jobs. I've had to apply, right, to a new posting that's on USA Jobs. And, part of that is really for transparency, to ensure we're getting the best fit and opening access to many qualified individuals. So it's very clear, Washington, D.C. area. Within that context, I really appreciate that I do have the opportunity to travel. Just over the last year or so, I've been to South Africa, India, Costa Rica, Pakistan, going to Mexico in October. So I think it's really valuable to, still have an opportunity to travel. And I think Nolan mentioned this when he read my bio, but even for civil servants, there's the opportunity to work at embassies. And so I spent, a summer working as the cultural affairs officer in Buenos Aires. So I think there's opportunity within the civil service structure to still get abroad. I also do domestic trips. I work a lot with universities. So, we'll travel to Virginia or Arizona or California, depending on who, we're meeting with and with whom we're trying to build new partnerships. So that's sort of the civil service lens.
Yeah, and the foreign service side, it's similar and different. I would say when you join the foreign service, most of our assignments are 2 to 3 years. Your first two assignments are going to be overseas at our embassies or consulates. The difference between an embassy and a consulate is the embassy is in the capital city. And in larger countries, we have consulates in important cities that are like satellite embassies almost. So, for example, in China, we know that the capital of China is Beijing, but there are also US consulates in places like Shanghai and Guangzhou and other places, or Brazil is another example, Brasilia, and you've got that's where the embassy is, but you have consulates in Sao Paulo, Recife, Rio, those kinds of things. So your first two assignments in the foreign service are going to usually be overseas, and those are what will be called directed assignments. They give you a list. They say, we have 100 countries that need officers right now. You tell us which ones are really high. You'd love to go to them. Tell us the ones that are kind of the middle of the road, and then tell us which ones you wouldn't like to go, and we'll do our best to pick one to send you there. So when I got my first assignment, I had no idea exactly where I was going until we have something called Flag Day, where they call your name and they hand you the flag of the country that you're going to. So hopefully you've studied all the flag possibilities, and they tell you what assignment you're going into. And it's like I said, it's like graduating from high school and having the principal say, you're going to this college and this is what you're going to study. It all in that one moment. After those first two assignments, which are your entry-level assignments, essentially you get to then say, I'd like to go to this country, or I'd like to work in this part of the State Department. And you have to apply. Essentially, you go to the decision makers and say, here are my qualifications. I want to throw my hat in the ring here. And sometimes there are 10 other people that want to do the same thing. And so it's kind of like constantly interviewing for a new job every 2 to 3 years. And that's what we do. We move We pack up all our stuff and generally move every 2 to 3 years. But after those first two assignments, you get a little bit more latitude, you get a little bit more leeway for the work that you're going to do. I think we just lost Kelsey, but anyway, hopefully that answers civil service and then foreign service.
So I think we're getting a little bit short on time here. But I'll take this connection. I'll take this question right here. So the question is, how would we get around all the current wars going on to be able to travel and make these connections? So I'd like to answer this one, then we can. But I want to say that the embassy does everything possible to make sure that you are safe overseas. There are someone called a regional security officer whose job is to look out for the security of the embassy itself. There is also Marine security guards at embassies as well. So there are always opportunities to, there are always ways to get around, and they will find ways for you to connect with people overseas. And I think I want people to realize, like I mentioned in my discussion about Kyrgyzstan, that yes, that there was lots of anti-American propaganda, but for the most part, when you go overseas, people are just excited to meet Americans, especially if they're in a place that not that many Americans go to. And so, it's a great world out there. Don't be afraid to go see it. The State Department is a great way to go and see the world. And I encourage you to please continue thinking about a State Department career. So before we close up, I do want to ask, my colleagues here, if they have any final thoughts, kind of why they think the State Department is so important to America and to Americans. So go ahead, Dan, if you want to start us off with that.
Sure. Can you hear me? Because I dropped off there for a second.
We got you.
Well, I mean, I hope you heard it in the passion and the responses that we provided tonight. I thought the questions were amazing. I'm really grateful that many of you stayed, so that was good. I have 3 kids myself, and I know that I can bore them. They're teenagers or now young adults. So, but I hopefully that was something that you found interesting. But on a serious note, the work that we do matters to our communities because the United States is not alone in the world. We live in a world that is increasingly interconnected, increasingly interdependent. You can look at any issue. Kelsey mentioned this earlier. There really is no issue. I think we've both talked about it. There is no issue that isn't global in nature in terms of the problems and the challenges that we face. So the solutions require us. They require us to be willing and capable of working with other people. And we do that for ourselves and for our own families and for our own country, in service to our country. But the reality is when we can do that and we're effective in doing that, we can help others, right? So that is why I think what we do as diplomats and as the State Department and as these technical experts in so many fields, that's why it matters, because the problems that we're faced with are not limited to our borders. And so you have to think big and you have to think outside your borders. And when you do that, you can find solutions. The United States is a mirror of the rest of the world in terms of who we are as a nation. And I think that makes us the world's leader in many ways. And I'm glad to be in that position where we can help serve others, solve the problems, make tomorrow globally better than it is today. And I think all of that matters.
Thanks, Dan. Great answer. Kelsey, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything Dan just said. And, as we confront ever challenging times, I think it's really important to understand the importance of collaboration and to reach out and understand those who are different from you. And I think we all realize in this line of work how similar we all are. And I think the opportunity to really advocate for American interests is really an honor. It's exciting and it's different every day. It really can challenge your skill sets. It can challenge your preconceived notions of what you believe and what you want to fight for. But I think something, everybody I know who works at the State Department is so patriotic and loves the United States. But I think something that's really unique about our country is we're also really open to criticism and understand that we are always trying to move in a direction where we can continue to improve. And I think part of public service is really putting yourself out there and finding ways to advocate for our country, for our interests, and that can be done in a lot of really creative ways. We also live in an ever-changing world, so your job is not the same every day because there are new issues and new challenges to confront. I think a lot of us are looking at emerging technology and sort of artificial intelligence and where this will go and how that will impact diplomacy and global collaboration. And I think it's really important for America to lead. We should be in positions of leadership. We should be fostering alliances. We should be continuing to work with one another. And it's also important to me that our taxpayers and constituents understand the kind of work that we're doing and are involved in the process. And so, I love anytime I have the opportunity to speak to individuals like yourselves and hopefully shed a little light on, what we're doing in this, big building in Washington, D.C. And I think there's really a lot of opportunity, and we need talent, we need drive, and hopefully this will inspire you to think a little bit more about a possible career with us.
All right, well, I don't have too much to add on to that, but I do want to put again for the plug, please consider joining an exchange program. Go overseas early and often. Please consider hosting an exchange student in your home. It's a great way to connect with the world here in America. Please consider joining Peace Corps or Fulbright ETA after you've graduated undergrad as you move on throughout your career path. And then please consider joining the State Department, where you can be one of the best, representing America overseas, working with incredible people like Kelsey and Dan and myself, and really making a difference in the world for America, making sure that America gets a fair shake at the table when we're negotiating these international agreements, making sure that American companies are protected when they're operating overseas, making sure that American citizens are treated fairly by officials overseas, making sure that people know the truth about the goodness of the American people. You can have a part in all of that. And I really hope that you walk away from this at least thinking about that as a possibility for your career, for your future, and for your service to the United States. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for our panelists. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you again to the National Society of High School Scholars and to our colleagues at State Department who helped put this together. It's been wonderful connecting with you all. Have a great evening.
Good night, all.